Chapter 13. Doc sensed the tension in the village as soon as they neared the temporary GHQ location. The villagers were gathered in groups, their eyes fixed on the sky where the station must be. Some were pacing back and forth, their gestures tense and agitated. Suddenly a woman broke into a frenzy. She leaped into the air and broke into a rapid trot, then a run. Her hands tore at her clothes and her mouth worked frantically. She was halfway up the nearest dune when a rifle shot rang out. She fell to the ground, twitching once before lying still. Almost immediately, another figure emerged from one of the houses, his face uncovered by the necessary aspirator. He ran frantically, but quickly succumbed to the lack of air. The villagers began to scatter, as if trying to distance themselves from each other. For weeks, they had bravely faced the horror that now overwhelmed them. The tension mounted as they received no news from the cities. Doc noticed that the disease seemed to worsen or accelerate after a while. In the next 30 minutes, he witnessed 3 men being shot. He tried to calm them by mentioning a possible cure for the plague, but their reactions were as strangely dull as Jake's. As he spoke, they faced him with fixed expressions. When he mentioned the need for young children's blood, they turned away from him, sullen and silent. Jake approached him, nodding unhappily. "It's what I was afraid of, Doc. George Lynn, tell Doc what's wrong." Lynn hesitated, but he eventually explained, "It's not like you, Doc. It's from that lobby woman you have. It's her dirty idea. We've seen the lobby doctors cutting open our kids, poisoning their blood and bleeding them dry. That's not going to happen again, Doc. You tell her it's not." Doc swore as he realized their ignorance. An unexplained vaccination appeared to be blood poisoning. However, he couldn't comprehend the bleeding aspect until Jake informed him, "Northport Infants Wing. Each department has its blood bank, and donation is mandatory. Southport started it a couple of months ago, too." The long arm of the lobby had reached out again. If he ever convinced them to try the treatment, it would only be after long sessions of preparing them with the facts, and there wasn't enough time for the crucial work. By the afternoon, Judge Ben Wilson arrived. His voice shook with exhaustion as he climbed up to address the crowd through a power megaphone. "Southport's going crazy," he said, pausing for breath between each sentence. "Earth's recalling all the important people. They're packing them into the ships. They're leaving only colonials with no Earth rights. Those ships left when they decided the plague was coming from here. They won't let anybody back until the plague is eradicated. There won't be an Earth technician on Mars tomorrow." "Are there any bombs?" someone asked. "No bombs. The ships must have started before you rebelled, maybe meaning to save their own kind. But now it's a military action, and don't think it won't mean trouble. The poor devils in the city bet on the wrong horse. Now they can't run their food factories or anything else for long. Not without technicians. They've got to whip you now. Up to this time, they've been fighting for the lobbies. Now they'll fight you for their own bellies to get your supplies. And they still have shuttle rockets and fuel for them. Now beat it. I have to confer with Jake." Doc attempted to follow the judge, but Dr. Harkness grabbed his arm and pulled him aside. Stan followed. "I found another epidemic," Harkness informed them. "Over at Marconi. It's kept me on the run all night, and now half the village is down with it. It starts like a common cold, runs a fair fever, and the skin breaks out all over with bright red dots." He went on describing it. Stan began inquiring about the medical supplies he had brought with him, stolen from Northport Hospital. She appeared to have knowledge of what was happening, but refused to disclose it until she saw the cases. Doc also opted to wait. Sometimes things were not as dire as they seemed, though typically they were worse. Marconi appeared to be deserted, with no one on the streets. It had been a village of great promise a week ago, as this was where they had decided to experiment with switching the people back to Earth normal. They had the best chance of survival of anyone on Mars until this happened. In the first house Harkness led them to, 3 people lay on the beds. The room was dimly lit, and a man was stumbling around trying to care for the others, despite the little spots on his skin. He smiled weakly. "Hi, Doc. I guess we're making a lot of trouble, huh?" Stan did not give Doc a chance to respond. "Just as I suspected. Measles. Plain old-fashioned measles." "Figured so," the sick man replied. "Like my brother back on Earth." The others appeared skeptical, but Doc reassured them. Stan should know. She had worked in a fancy hospital where the patients were mostly Earth normal. Measles was one of the diseases that was thwarted by the metabolism switch. Well, at least they would not have to be quarantined here. Stan finished treating the family with detached efficiency, discussing the symptoms loudly with Harkness. "It's a good thing it isn't serious." "No," Harkness replied bitterly. "Not serious. It's only killed 5 children and 3 adults so far." "It would be here," Doc agreed unhappily. He led Stan out of the room on the pretext of washing his hands. "It's serious enough to make us abandon the entire concept of returning to Earth normal. Measles today, smallpox, tuberculosis, scarlet fever, and everything else tomorrow. These people have lived Mars normal for so long that their natural immunity has been destroyed. On Earth, where the disease was ubiquitous, kids used to develop some immunity with constant exposure, even without what could be considered a case of the disease. Here, the blood has no reason to produce antibodies. They can be killed by things people used to laugh at. I don't know how the disease arrived here, but it's here, so we'll have to give up the idea of switching back to Earth normal." He grabbed one of the kits and began walking toward the other houses. "And who knows how long it will take to get the blood for the other treatment, even if it works." They worked together for a while, with Harkness scowling as he observed Stan. Eventually, the young doctor stopped Stan outside the 5th house. "These are my patients, Dr. Tanana. I left the lobby because I didn't believe colonials were just livestock. I still feel the same way. I appreciate your assistance in diagnosis and treatment methods, but I cannot allow you to treat my patients in this manner." "Dan!" She spun around, her eyes glazed. "Dan, are you going to tolerate that?" "I believe you should wait in the tractor, Stan." He was fortunate enough to catch the kit she hurled at him before its valuable contents spilled, but it was not luck that guided his hand to the back of her skirt hard enough to leave it stinging. Her expression froze and she stormed out of the room. A moment later, they heard the tractor start up. Doc didn't have time to dwell on her departure. He and Harkness split up and began scouring the streets, house by house, while he relayed the message to switch back to Mars normal and abandon the metabolism switch. Jake sent 2 other doctors to relieve them late in the evening. Things were relatively calm at GHQ as Doc reported the events at Marconi. "Where's Dr. Tanana?" Jake finally asked. Doc exchanged glances with Harkness. "She's not in the lab." "Wasn't there an hour ago?" Doc cursed himself for letting her go. With the knowledge that the radio in the mic was disabled, she had obviously taken the first opportunity to report back, and with her went news of the only cure they had found. Jake took it as stoically as possible, though it was a heavy blow to his hopes. They spent half the night searching for her tractor, hoping she had gotten lost or broken down, but there was no sign of it. She was waiting in the lab when he returned at dawn. Her face was smudged, and her uniform was a mess, but she was smiling. She got up to greet him, holding out 2 large bottles. "Infant plasma, straight from Southport. And if you think I had it easy lying my way in and out of the hospital, you're a fool, Dan Miley. If the man who took my place there hadn't been a native idiot, I never would have gotten away with it." He realized that the things he had suspected could still be true. She could have reported everything to the lobby. It was a better explanation than her vague account of bullying her way in and out. But she had had a rough drive, and he needed the plasma. Strangely, he was glad to have her back with him. He reached out a hand for the bottles. She placed the bottles on the table and picked up a short-bladed knife. "Not so fast," she exclaimed. Her eyes were now blazing. "Dan Miley, if you touch those bottles until you've crawled across the floor on your face and apologized for the way you treated me the last few days, I'll cut your damned heart out." He shook his head, chuckling at the image she presented. There were times when he could almost see why he had married her. "All right, Stan," he relented. "I'll be damned if I'll crawl, but you've earned an apology, okay?" She sighed uncertainly. Then she nodded and began changing for work.